The religious are really bad at rational arguments, aren't they? If they find an excuse to offer or a bold rationalization to invent, they'll do it in a heartbeat because it's really all about their emotions, not about the objective facts. Reality is far too scary for them to exist in, yet they do, whether they like it or not. So let's see another example of it all going horribly wrong. Because these pseudo-academics aren't any better than the lunatics in the pews. So stand by for stupidity in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to part 3 of Josh Rasmussen's Look at the Problem of Evil, and as I suspect that we all expect, he's going to get absolutely nowhere useful. In fact, he really hasn't even addressed the actual problem of evil so far at all, has he? Maybe in the 4th part, I have no idea, maybe he'll actually get there. All that he's really doing here is trying to coddle the fifis of the religiously immature, and that's really not impressive to anybody but the theologically delusional. Now, I'm not sure why anyone thinks that this helps the theistic argument, but then again, they don't actually want to talk to us at all, do they? They'd rather hide and tell each other comforting stories and just make stuff up, which is really what's coming up today. So, if that's what you're looking for, enjoy, I guess.
Why is there evil?
Yeah, I know. I let you get in 4 words, but I've got to give you my views before I let you run around with the goalposts. Because, let's be honest, that's exactly what's going to happen. We already know that. The fact is, there isn't evil. At least, there isn't any such thing as objective evil. Evil is just the label that we put on things that we really don't like. Just like good is the label that we put on things that we happen to approve of. It's entirely subjective, and it doesn't matter how many people share that subjective view, it remains subjective regardless. Nothing is inherently evil, and nothing is inherently good. And anybody who thinks that there is, they clearly haven't thought about it critically enough. So let's see what Josh has to say, because I'm willing to bet it's not going to be rationally defensible.
This video is number 3 in a series on how evil might fit into a world with a good foundation. In the previous video, I suggested that it is perhaps unsurprising that at least some things would happen for reasons beyond my sight. But that doesn't answer my heart's deep questions. What are the reasons for evil? Like Job, one may question whether anything could genuinely make sense of the tragedies we see.
And there's the whole problem. He's looking at it as, why does this happen to me? As though there's a reason, when more often than not, it just happens. It just does. There are lots of people out there desperately trying to draw connections between bad stuff that happens and some reason or cause for it to happen to them. And that's not the way it works. Sometimes shit just happens. Deal with it. Why do babies sometimes get born with cancer? Because that's how reality is. There's no reason for it. There's no purpose behind it. There's no cause that somebody thought, I should really make this happen. And that's the kind of thing that Josh is looking for. But that's nonsense. Why do animals get burned up in a forest fire? Because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's it. There is no deeper reason. You have to get over yourself, Josh, and a lot of people have a serious problem doing so. They are allowing their emotional state to get in the way of their capacity to rationally evaluate reality. Don't do that. Grow up and deal with the world as it actually is, regardless of how it makes you feel, because how you feel doesn't actually matter. Come on, it's really not that hard. I promise.
The purpose of this video, like the previous, is not to answer every question. Rather, I will merely offer one more tool you can use in your own further analysis.
In other words, instead of trying to find any actual answers, he's just going to throw out emotionally comforting diatribes meant to appeal to specific groups of religious people because that's how they've been indoctrinated to look at the world. This is why having an intelligent conversation with the religious is often so difficult, because they have all of these really asinine ideas stuffed into their heads that they are completely unwilling to let go of because, fifis. This is why you can't talk about science with creationists or astrophysics with flat earthers. Their beliefs have poisoned their intellect. They are incapable of seeing reality as it actually is anymore. It harms their emotional state, and they refuse to actually learn anything useful that gets in the way of their beliefs. This is why religion is such a mind poison. It demonstrably harms everyone.
The tool is theodicy. A theodicy is simply an account to some of the reasons a perfect being may have for allowing various evils.
Yet, you haven't shown that there is a perfect being to begin with. Here we see Josh starting with an emotionally comforting conclusion because he really wants it to be true, and he can only consider questions through the lens of his already existing belief structure. This is why, if you talk to a flat earther, they're going to interpret all of the data through the lens of their pre-existing beliefs. This has to be true because they've got an emotional attachment to the things that they already believe. They lack the capacity to step back and evaluate the data fairly and without prejudice because their entire worldview is prejudice incarnate. If you're talking to somebody like Josh, I would imagine anyway, because I don't actually know Josh, I can only go by his videos, but if you were talking to somebody like him, you'd be unlikely to ever get past the preconception that there has to be a God, because God is a fundamental part of their views. It would be like saying up is down and black is white, and they just couldn't handle that. And that's why they have such a problem changing their minds. Because in reality, they're not using them in the first place.
To develop a theodicy, we can consider from both reason and experience how bad things depend on or lead to greater goods.
But they don't. Just as there is no objective bad, there's no objective good either. And this is where bald rationalization enters into the fray. They have constructed this view of the world in their heads that isn't actually accurate. But because it makes them feel good, it becomes part and parcel with their own self-identity, to the point that trying to push through it would result in the complete collapse of their psyche, so they never do that. These people simply do not live in the real world anymore. They start with the belief that there is a God, whether they can demonstrate it or not, and we all know they can't, and that becomes the cornerstone of everything else in their head. Whether or not it's true, they don't care. It's entirely irrelevant. This doesn't matter. It exists beyond their capacity to consider the rational ramifications of their beliefs. And this is why these people are such a complete mess.
Theodicies are not designed to answer all our questions, but they might help put some of our questions into a larger perspective.
No, they don't answer any questions at all, at least not demonstrably. They start with the emotionally comforting assumptions that the religion that they have, the religion they were raised in, the religion they've been brainwashed in believing, that is absolutely true, and then they build from there. They can't backtrack to see if any of it makes any sense whatsoever. Well, this is how God could be. But you don't have a demonstrable God first, do you? You can't just believe it because you want to believe it, and that's really all they do, isn't it? It's exactly why childhood indoctrination is so devastatingly insidious. It really messes people up.
To illustrate just one theodicy, I will sketch a theory that is inspired by my own reflections on the elements of a great story. I call it the love story theodicy. In near-death experiences, various people have reported meeting a being of light upon cardiac arrest.
Yes, they have reported that. That's not actually what's going on, though. We know the actual medical reasons behind it, and for the most part, we can replicate it all in the lab. What's happening is electrochemical, not supernatural. And I'm sure that people like Josh here really want to believe that it's true, because it fits in with the religious beliefs that they already have. They only want to validate what's already in their heads. They don't actually care what's really going on. They don't want to accept what the best supported and independently verified explanation is, because that's not emotionally comforting. It's another reason why it's so hard to talk to these people, because they'd rather believe a comforting lie than to have to face a potentially uncomfortable truth. The truth is the truth, no matter how it makes you feel, but for them, fee-fees are all. And that's really pretty stupid.
In some cases, they report asking the being of light questions, including questions about evil and suffering. I have heard many such cases, and in all the cases of which I'm aware, there is a core common theme. They feel a sense that this life is part of a far greater story, and that love is central to their purposes.
Based on the mythology that they've had drummed into their heads from a very early age. Here's the reality, though. You don't see people from, say, Western cultures seeing Eastern deities during NDEs. You also don't see the reverse. It's always the things that you're the most familiar with showing up when your brain is on the verge of catastrophic shutdown. Why? Because this isn't really happening. It's all brain chemistry and trauma. It's something the religious don't want to listen to, though, because it says something distinctly unpleasant about the ideas that they use to dictate their lives. Well, too bad, because this is the reality, and you don't just get to pick and choose.
Now, whether or not you believe any of these reports, my observation here is just that this theme of love and greater story interweaves the world's great spiritual traditions, and it enters into many of the classic theodicies.
Because people want comfort. That doesn't mean that's really what's going on, though. It's why the brain releases DMT during high stress periods, such as close to death. And you know what DMT does? It causes hallucinations. Like I said, it's all brain chemistry, and these people, they aren't remotely interested in the facts. They just want to feel good.
The love story theodicy connects love and greater purpose to the following question. What are the elements of a great story? Here are some elements that I see. Exploration, tensions and releases, comic relief, courage in the face of uncertainty, layers of truth, layers of discovery, challenge, progress, a variety of dynamic characters, diversity of relationships, episodes that contribute to a larger plot, romance, hints of the future, trials, sacrifice, cleverness, real dangers, elements of horror, redemption, victory, interwoven stories that build together towards something greater, consistent rules that cannot be broken willy-nilly, unpredictable surprises, long-term projects, and heroic displays of love.
You do notice that he just contradicted himself, right? How do you get consistent rules and unpredictable surprises? Yeah, okay, whatever, Josh. What he's talking about here isn't reality, though. It's just storytelling. It's myth-making. It's exactly the kind of thing that went into the Bible and every religious tradition that mankind has ever invented for himself to follow. It's fine that you understand what goes into a decent story, but that doesn't mean that's how reality actually works. You did notice that, though, right? He's using the same tools to evaluate mythology as he is to evaluate his perception of reality. That's kind of sad, isn't it?
A truly great story would involve a great sacrifice of love by the greatest being in that story, and it would involve layers of mystery to be uncovered. there would be tragedy, yet all tragedies for all souls would be transformable into something beautiful and perhaps unexpected in later scenes.
He's describing the Bible, which is just a book of mythology, and I don't think he realizes what he's doing, because none of them ever do. The reason it reads like a book of fiction is because it is a book of fiction. It's just something that got made up over time. It isn't real. But the second anyone brought that up to Josh, he just rejected out of hand because he doesn't like that. That idea doesn't make him happy. Well, too bad for you. Unfortunately for people like Josh, happiness doesn't really mean anything. The ideas that are actually relevant are the ideas that actually hold up in objective reality. Sure, you might want to be happy, but that doesn't mean that your happiness colors the way that the world actually works. This is stupid. It really, really is. But this is the way the religious operate.
Interestingly, the love story theodicy is consistent with the canons of both logic and human history. The love story theodicy can also provide a basis for hope to anyone enduring a trial in their own story.
Except, hope doesn't matter, does it? Sure, you might want hope, but in reality, shit just happens. You're just trying to tell yourself comforting tales in your head so you don't have to feel so bad when things happen to go south. Well, too bad for you. Whether you're happy when the avalanche squishes you into a pulp or not, that's still your fate. Your happiness doesn't actually change anything. There is no reason to take any of this seriously because ultimately, you're just a big bag of water and chemicals and a 3-pound sack of meat in your head. What happens, happens. Your feelings, while they might feel good to you, they don't actually impact anything on the outside.
Also, something like the love story theodicy is not unexpected if the foundation is indeed good, since a good foundation would value a good, true story. Now, whether the love story is a framework for a true story, or merely a fantasy ultimately produced by the mindless motions of matter, is a question for each person in the story to consider.
No, it's not. This is something else that you'll find with the religious. There is no my truth or your truth. There is only the truth. If you're seeking out the truth, then you're probably not going to fall for any of this emotionally comforting religious bunk. Your feelings don't matter to anybody but you. They don't have any impact on objective reality around you, whether you like that or not. And that's why the religious don't want to talk to us, because we're going to point out everywhere that they're going wrong. And they're going wrong an awful lot of places. But they don't want to hear that, do they? So they'd rather just, run away and hide. And that brings us back to the very beginning of the video, where Josh asked a very simple question. Why is there evil? And he never even tried to answer that, did he? It's because the religious just don't have an answer. They just have assertions pulled out of their backsides because it makes them happy. They are desperately trying to rationalize their way back to emotional comfort. They don't actually want real answers, because real answers, they aren't comforting. It's far easier to just wave your arms around and accept a comforting lie than to actually strive for objective truth, whether it makes you happy or not. Your happiness doesn't really matter at all. It doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't get you to the facts. It only gets you to chemical ecstasy, and no matter how good that might feel in the moment, it's ultimately hollow. Yet the religious, they don't really care about any of that, do they? It's why it's so pointless engaging with them most of the time, because they are incapable of stepping away from their childish emotional state and just dealing with things the way that they actually are. Because they're terrified of how things actually are. And that's really, really sad, isn't it?